this world, evil lurks. It quietly waits in the shadows, silently stalking until it decides to strike. Evil hides among the crowd, pretending to be your friends, your colleagues, your neighbors. When evil strikes, it does so brutally and without warning. Prepare yourself for the dark world of the macabre while we investigate Notorious Evil.
Hello and welcome to Notorious Evil. I am your host, Killer Cutie, and today is Wicked Wednesday, which means we're gonna be talking about some really wicked people. Like, damn. In our lineup tonight, we're gonna be talking about Arthur Shawcross, Irina Gaidamachuck. Yes, that's her name. I'm sorry if I butchered it. Elizabeth Weiss, Dorothea Puente. So we're going to cover those people today. We're going to get into it. Before we do that, though, we want to watch a video about the psychological aspect of it. So bear with me, and we're going to get that started right now.
We so love our Hollywood psychopaths.
Turn on television at night and people watch Dexter about a serial killer, I guess, with a conscience. Does that make any sense?
But in reality, psychopaths are everywhere, from down and out to high and mighty.
The individuals who were psychopaths had very good careers.
Therapy is no sure thing.
My therapy was actually making him more violent.
So how do we cope with them?
If someone seems like they're really coming on strong, promise the world with no hesitation, that's probably someone to be careful of.
Run as far away from this type of person as possible.
I'm Anne Marie McDonald. Doc Zone turns a wary eye on the psychopath next door. Psychopath. It wouldn't be wrong if you conjured images of predatory killers, axe-wielding maniacs, or the infamous Hannibal Lecter upon hearing the word.
I'll help you catch him, Clary.
The psychopath holds a special place in our society because of our fascination with the dark side of humanity. But most psychopaths don't fit the stereotype.
You're going to run into one of these individuals sometime in your life, more than once, and the encounter could either be exhilarating, thrilling, exciting, or devastating. More likely the latter.
Psychopaths are not disordered. They don't suffer from a deficit, but they're simply different.
Dr. Robert Hare is known as the godfather of psychopathy. A forensic psychologist at the University of British Columbia, he developed the psychopathy checklist used by law enforcement agencies and courts all over the world to identify those clusters of traits that only show up in psychopaths. His groundbreaking book, Without Conscience, pinpoints the hallmark of any psychopath: a total disregard of right and wrong.
Most of the psychopaths are living right next to us and living a reasonably normal life, but creating some sort of distress, psychological or environmental or financial, for others around them.
And psychopaths have always been with us, as far back as the written record. Nor do psychopaths discriminate when it comes to race or culture. Inuit lore described them this way.
They refer to them as people whose mind knows what to do, but they don't do it. The ones who stayed behind when all the others went out hunting, and they come back a couple of months later and all the women are pregnant, and say, what's going on here? But they had ways of dealing with these individuals. They didn't try to treat them or talk to them. They would get rid of them.
Thank you very much, Bob.
Cute ass, cute him
The
dead.
study of psychopathic behavior is relatively new. It's been Bob Hare's life work. His diagnostic checklist is based on research with hundreds of criminals in Canadian prisons.
If I want to study something, I go where it's likely to be. So the prevalence of psychopathy in prisons is high, and access to information is readily available.
While psychopaths make up 25% of violent offenders in prison, most psychopaths are not criminals. It's estimated that between 1 and 2% of the general adult male population are psychopaths, which means there could be as many as 600,000 in Canada alone. They could be your neighbor, your boss, your friend, or your spouse. Hare considers them society's most dangerous individuals. His diagnostic checklist measures 20 key personality characteristics which reveal psychopathic traits: egocentric, lacking remorse, guilt, and empathy, deceitful, glib, and shallow. Hare's checklist scores those characteristics on a scale from 0 to 40.
The average score in the population might be 1 or 2. The average score in prisons is about 20, 21, and we use 30 out of 40 as a convenient threshold for defining psychopathy. Now that's very, very high, and that's light years away from the average person. In the general population, what other person who gets a score of 10? I mean, this is well below the threshold for psychopathy, but if you look at the characteristics, these are probably not very nice people.
Psychopaths don't act or look crazy. They're not mentally ill. In fact, they're masters at appearing normal. Their main defect, what psychologists call severe emotional detachment, is harder to diagnose than schizophrenia or bipolar disorder. They don't feel emotion, but act as if they do. They know right from wrong, but lack remorse and empathy. Psychopaths are pathological liars who love to con and manipulate others.
You're kind of surprised because you have the feeling that they think and feel the way we do. And they're going to respond to a situation much the way we do, and they're going to be empathetic and loving and warm and honest, full of integrity. And this often doesn't happen.
In fact, they behave like predators. They are at the top of the food chain, and the rest of us are just lunch. In a psychopath's worldview, they are the cat, and we are all mice.
The cat is a cat, and the cat doesn't know what the mouse is going through, nor does it care. If the mouse has got 3 little nieces at home somewhere, so what? It's a mouse, and I can eat it and I do what I want with it. And the mouse is thinking, I'm a mouse, and what's that thing trying to do to me? And the mouse tries to impart its own values onto the cat. And the cat, of course, has a different set of values based upon its evolution, right? So we have predators and prey.
It's a recurring theme in the world of psychopathy research. They see themselves as the dominant species because our emotions make us weak. And psychopaths tend to be male.
It's quite clear that psychopaths operate at a very basic physiological level. They don't experience the same kinds of emotions that the rest of us do that makes our lives quite rich, whether it's positive or negative emotions, sort of the roller coaster of life. As a psychopath goes through life largely flat, but again engaging in various thrill-seeking behaviors to try to get a bit of a bang, to get away from that sort of flat line.
Dr. Porter says psychopaths may be emotionally dead, but they're not psychotic, out of touch with reality. They know exactly what they're doing, quickly weighing the risks and benefits first. And it's all about reward.
They are ultra-rational thinkers. They don't have the clouding of emotion that the rest of us do, and certainly make conscious decisions, rational decisions about whether to commit an action that, at least at a cognitive level, they understand is wrong. That they know if they stick a knife in that other person's chest, that they will cease to breathe, that they will end up dying. They know that society looks at that behavior and that outcome extremely negatively. This is clearly an immoral act.
It's a good weight there.
We're so attracted by physical appearance that trumps practically everything else about the individual. And we evaluate this person by how he or she looks and dresses and talks. They're going to go into something where they can take advantage of their talents, where there's power, prestige, control, sex, money. That's where they're going to go. They're not stupid. They go to the watering hole rather than somewhere out in the desert where there's no prey. They go where the prey are.
And psychopaths are everywhere. Wolves in sheep's clothing blending in with the rest of us.
Modern business is a perfect environment for them because it enables them to achieve the desires that they want in terms of money, in terms of controlling other people, in terms of gaining power and prestige, of course.
British professor and author Clive Boddy believes psychopathic behavior was largely responsible for the global financial crisis. In England alone, the financial services sector accounts for 1/3 of the GDP, making the fallout even more damaging. Boddy says investment deals were so complex, even the brokers didn't understand them.
You ask yourself what kind of people would sell a product that they don't understand and can't properly price. You'd have to be without conscience.
You just might be a sociopath.
Psychopaths are risk takers, ruthless in their single-minded focus, skills that corporations often value, skills that ensure a quick climb up the corporate ladder.
And he ends up being a very successful businessman. So rather than go out and rob the bank, he becomes a director of the bank. So depending upon the environment you're brought up in, how intelligent you are, how good looking you are, if you learn to dress and speak properly, and you're attractive, you're devastating. And if you're psychopathic, deadly.
And Clive Boddy saw it all coming. A few years before the financial collapse, he began hearing that some bank executives went so far as to use Bob Hare's psychopath checklist to recruit employees.
Presumably that was because they thought those new employees would be cutthroat and ruthless towards their competitors. The danger, of course, is that they're
hire a bunch of psychopaths to work for me.
Employs them as well. It's like saying criminals are good at guarding Fort Knox, guarding the gold, guarding the crown jewels. The outcome would be inevitable. That the gold would go missing, the jewels would be stolen.
Take Bernie Madoff, the former chairman of NASDAQ, who orchestrated a $50 billion Ponzi scheme. Madoff happened to get caught, if only as a result of the financial crisis. But people like him remain in positions of power, respected for their financial acumen.
The first people the governments in the West turned to help them get out of the global financial crisis were the very people who had caused the global financial crisis in the first place. If some of those people were people that have no conscience, as psychopaths are, then the advice that they give will not necessarily be in the best interests of either the companies they work for or the societies in which they live.
But Boddy's current research on corporate psychopaths suggests senior levels of the British government feel the financial services sector is simply too big to fail. Better to tolerate the corruption than destabilize the banking system.
I would argue that that would be an incorrect conclusion to come to, because if the system has been corrupted by the presence of corporate psychopaths, then the best thing to do is to get those people out of there rather than hope that the problem will go away on its own, because it won't.
Business ethics, corporate responsibility, best practices. Buzzwords companies like to promote as part of their brand. But in the winner-take-all stakes of business, psychopathic values are winning out in the office. And those highly touted ethics quickly take a back seat.
Sorry about the 15th there the other day.
You got lucky. Don't worry, it won't happen again.
That it won't. It's okay, I got it.
In fact, the corporate world seems to be a natural habitat for psychopaths. One study of 203 executives across several companies found a much higher incidence of psychopathy than in the general population. Its author was Dr. Paul Babiak.
And what we find, surprisingly, was that there was a rate of 3.9% in that population of individuals that had scored high enough on the psychopathy checklist that they had hit the mark for being assessed as a psychopath.
Babiak, along with Bob Hare, co-authored Snakes in Suits, When Psychopaths Go to Work, the first major study of psychopaths in the boardroom. Their findings caught the media's attention as people sought to understand how the financial crisis happened.
Those that we found were rated high in psychopathy were rated very high in communication skills, charisma, visioning, but they were also rated extremely low on performance productivity factors. Despite that, despite having that evidence showing that these were not good performers,
this
the individuals who were
checklist has
psychopaths had very good
used
careers,
in law
and there was
enforcement
no threat of them
and
losing
court.
their jobs. In fact, that they were still on succession plans to move up.
Look, this is one hell of a deal. You know, you're not going to get another deal like this. You're not going to get another chance. This is it.
Babiak describes the psychopath as the smooth, confident, fast-talking rising star in the office. He knows what to say and who to say it to. It's easy for the psychopath to sing the right tune and hit all the right notes.
Psychopaths are what I would call parasitic predators. They find a target, a victim organization. They latch onto it and they suck everything out of it that they can.
Now, I'm swamped with meetings all day.
Everyone has seen this guy. He's the one who takes credit for your idea, is never around when there's a deadline, makes an excuse for not being there, or blames everyone else when there's a failure. It's always about him. They serve only one master, themselves.
They'll take credit for as much as they can, sometimes even claiming that they're giving advice to the vice president or the CEO, which is not true, but they want to get credit for it.
Hey, Carly.
Hey, Marcus.
How you doing?
Babiak has identified the different kinds of psychopaths based on their favorite strategies for succeeding in the workplace.
Well, you know, there's definitely a promotion in it for you. Really? For sure, and I could put in a good word with the boss as well.
The con is an individual who uses their voice to manipulate people and is very verbally fluent, facile with their voice. They're quite manipulative and they're good readers of people, so they tell a good story. They're often entertaining. They mix a lot of falsehood with truth, but you can't tell where one stops and the other begins. And so they get people to do things for them by conning them.
Look, you're making me look bad, and if you can't get the job done, I'll find someone else who will.
The bully is perhaps more crass. It's an individual who might start out using the conning techniques and manipulative techniques, but when they don't get their way, they tend to escalate a little and start using dominance and force to get what they want.
Oh, hey, it's the truth. I mean, it's good that there's people like you around here, not like certain people.
And the puppet master is really the master of them all. That's an individual who has the wide repertoire of psychopathic traits, but what makes them so interesting is they get other people to do their dirty work. So the puppet master pulls the strings on a small group of individuals who are loyal to him or her. Well, I do give talks to business groups, and occasionally an individual during a break will come up and say, you know, that I'd like to hire people with some of these traits.
Such corporate predators are often referred to as successful psychopaths.
And I'd say successful in what respect? They've screwed a lot of people. They've ruined tens of thousands of lives, right? They make decisions that impact upon a whole society. And they do this without any particular concern,
What state
remorse,
was that?
no
Because
emphasis
Golden
on
State,
population.
I mean,
impressive.
I know it's stupid,
And they
but
do
it's
it
not
without
coming up
any
in my
risk
mind.
to
What state
themselves.
was it?
It was very much a heads we win, tails you lose type of argument, because no matter what they do, at the end of the day, they're not playing with their own money. They're not betting their own money, and they're not betting their own bonuses or resources or careers even.
Coming up, psychopathic behavior doesn't end with the workday. Those traits go home, from the boardroom to the bedroom.
In normal relationships, sex is bonding. I mean, that's how we're wired. We connect to, you know, our sexual partner, except that experience is not happening on the other end with him.
You look fantastic.
Thank you. So do you.
Oh, thank you.
The psychopath knows how to project an aura of power, status, and excitement. He's driven to get whatever he sets his sights on, and when the object of his desire is a woman, he is a master of seduction.
These men are anything but boring, and the women find that extremely attractive. His power, his dominance, his success in life. The beginning of the relationship, very whirlwind, very love bombing, lots of gifts, money, trips, attention, sex, whatever. And so the intensity of that is like no other.
I'm sorry, I'm making fun of the lady. I'm sorry.
Psychopaths lure their victims. A counselor and author of the book Women Who Love Psychopaths, she's seen the pattern time and time again. It starts with targeting the right woman. As one psychopath admitted,
he said, I throw a hook out for empathy. And depending on how they respond to that is whether I will pursue it. There's no use going there if she doesn't take the bait. And so that's how they'll test the waters.
Oh, well, you ain't getting nowhere with me then.
Next weekend to my dad's 60th.
While psychopaths themselves have no empathy, they're masterful playing the sympathy card whenever it's needed.
I was abused as a child. You're the only one that I could have told this to. I've never felt this way before. You're the only one that's keeping me off drugs and alcohol. You're the strength that I need in order to climb the career ladder at my job. They just find what works in terms of tapping into the empathy within the women.
Another powerful tool in the psychopath arsenal is sex. Some theorize they have such a high sex drive because it's a physiological act that allows the psychopath to feel something. Sandra Brown thinks there's more to it.
Most of the women have not had that level of hypersexuality, and the psychopath often has a reduced need for sleep, high need for stimulation, reduced need for sleep. And so the early parts of the relationship can be what we call marathon sex. There's a release of oxytocin, the sex hormone, which creates a sensation of bonding and also of trust.
Once hooked, the psychopath works quickly to reel in his victim.
They're describing this guy as a monster.
Marriage, all in a heady
non-human
rush
monster
before the mask starts to slip. That's just what happened to a woman we'll call Elaine, after a whirlwind romance with a man she thought was her soulmate. Out of concern for her safety and her children, we have concealed her identity.
It was like being hypnotized. It was. He would just gaze into my eyes and just have that intensity that there was no one else in the room but us. He seemed very charming. We had a lot of the same interests. We wanted to go camping, hiking, ballroom dancing. He seemed to value being a family man, a father, and had children, which was really what I wanted too. I wanted to have someone to share my life with. And I had hoped I was able to make that dream come true with him. In my mind, I had hoped that I could be dancing with him until we were in our golden years.
And then there were the revelations about his miserable childhood.
He was the youngest of a family of 8, and that how cruel his father was to him, and that his mom never had time for him. I just sensed this was a very sad and lonely soul, and I could feel that sadness in his heart, and I wanted to help share my love and understanding with him, and just to help him have a brighter future.
But there were warning signs that not all his stories were true. She discovered he wasn't single after all, but he assured her a divorce was imminent. Despite some nagging doubts, Elaine agreed to marry him. That's when everything changed.
I didn't matter to him in the same way now that he, in a sense, had me, now that we were married. And just like the thrill was off, he was the hunter and he had caught the prey, and he would get angry at the slightest thing. And we ended up, all of us in the house, we felt we were walking on eggshells around him. For instance, if someone just spilled some juice, he would hit the ceiling.
Her new husband became cold and distant, spending hours on the computer. And one day, she found out why.
He sort of laughed it off and said, "Oh, I'm just seeing what's out there." He could look you in the eye and lie, and yet, it just didn't even blink. He didn't faze him one bit. He was a master at twisting the facts, twisting information.
Soon after, she says, he began hurting their children.
He tripped our little boy, and then he smirked. Those types of when he was just learning to walk, I think that he really enjoyed that. But I remember I would look and then just be shocked.
Okay, I can see why they're inhuman monsters. I get it.
Moment where he where the mask dropped.
Off the
Who am I with?
children.
Who is this person? And it does feel like he's a total stranger. You know, it made me feel like I was going crazy.
As his angry outbursts escalated, so did her fear. On one occasion, the brakes on Elaine's car failed.
I guess something could happen to the brakes, but at the same time,
kill her.
Was he trying to hurt me? Was he hoping that I would get into an accident?
Desperate for help, she went to see a counselor. His words were chilling.
Your husband is a psychopath, and that his behavior, that he will always behave that way. They can't change. This is hardwired in them. And that's what's so hard to understand. It's like if someone has a disease or an illness, that will be with them.
Elaine filed for divorce, ending her 2.5-year marriage.
They hurt their partners financially, physically, emotionally, sexually, spiritually. And to me, that's the worst on your very soul. That it is so devastating.
Marriage to a psychopath can be a nightmare. But what happens when the psychopath is your own child? Experts now believe it's possible to identify psychopathic tendencies in children as young as 3. Callous, unemotional traits and lack of guilt about wrongdoing are the hallmarks. Red flags Doug Kirk and his wife tried to ignore in their son. The problems started in his early teens.
He would borrow my bike, and then it wouldn't come back, and I'd say, what happened to it? He said it was stolen. Well, turns out it wasn't stolen. He just pawned it.
The pattern repeated itself. Tools would go missing. Stories concocted that eventually were discovered to be lies. Even though Kirk has a degree in psychology, he didn't know then what his son was. By the time he was 19, he became a master of manipulation.
You know, he's handsome, tall, charming, intelligent, so no problem getting a job. But he wouldn't last more than a few weeks because he'd start stealing from people or lying to them, and they'd fire him. You have kids, you love them, you want them to be successful.
Like many psychopaths, Kirk's son saw an opportunity to capitalize on the financial crisis. So 9 years later, his son called him out of the blue with a business proposition.
There were hundreds of boats being repossessed down in the States. You know, the economy was just in terrible shape. But if you bought them right, you could still sell them up here. So he suggested, you know, if I had a few boats over the winter time that I could work on and get cleaned up and deal with whatever mechanical issues with, then I'd have inventory to sell in the spring. And I think I could do pretty well at it. And I bet.
In the end, his own son took him for $300,000. Kirk is convinced there is nothing anyone can do to change or treat a psychopath. It's taken him a lifetime to understand that.
And I still love him. He's my son. But you have to be realistic and you have to face facts. And you don't have to be duped time after time after time.
He's your son,
like
but he's
I was.
Crook.
When we return, going inside the brain of a psychopath.
You have brains that seem to be hypersensitive to reward, brains that seem to be undersensitive to the suffering of others. You know, this is the picture of psychopathy, right? So this is a brain of someone who is very dangerous.
So does anybody recognize these lovely individuals up here on the screen?
These psychopaths may be notorious, but what science is still trying to unravel is the mystery of their minds. How does the psychopath think? How does he react? That's what UBC forensic psychologist Dr. Stephen Porter is trying to discover. A key experiment, how the psychopath goes about selecting his victim.
It's very much like watching a lion looking for the weakest gazelle, and very much premeditated, very carefully sort of planned out antisocial behavior, and ultimately preying on the individual in whatever way they might desire.
In an experiment using facial expressions, psychopaths could accurately detect fear in people from a very young age. Porter's colleague at UBC Kelowna, Dr. Michael Woodworth.
We expected across the board they'd have trouble recognizing the different emotions due to their emotional deficits. We found that they did actually better at recognizing fearful faces, suggesting that even at quite an early age, they are already starting to engage in a sort of predatory-like thinking where they're able to pick out certain individuals or see cues in their environment that would suggest this might be somebody that they could have as a victim.
Neuroscience also offers clues as to what might be going on in a psychopath's brain. At the University of Wisconsin, Dr. Mike Koenigs uses an MRI scanner to compare the brains of normal subjects with those of psychopaths in prison.
So there's a specific circuit very deep in the brain that is responsive to essentially anything that we find innately pleasurable. So things like money, drugs, sex, chocolate. When you look at a psychopathic brain's response to reward, what we find is that the more psychopathic the individual is, the stronger that this area of the brain lights up to reward, called the amygdala, primary sort of fear center of the brain. And another circuit of the brain that we know to be responsible for empathy, for the regulation of emotion, for motivating pro-social behavior, for regulating our moral judgments, we also see some degraded connections in that circuit of the brain.
There is reduced connectivity between these two areas of the brain, the amygdala and the prefrontal cortex. The primitive emotions of fear and pleasure-seeking weren't being moderated by the brain's executive power center.
You have brains that seem to be hypersensitive to reward, brains that seem to be undersensitive to the suffering of others. This is the picture of psychopathy, right? So this is a brain of someone who is very dangerous.
So is the psychopath born bad, or does he become bad? Despite all the research, there is no widespread agreement. Some believe it's genetic, while others blame social environment. Truth is, it is a bit more complicated.
The question of whether psychopaths are born and made is actually usually framed in the kind of the old-fashioned argument of nature and nurture. It's either nature or it's either nurture.
Dr. Kevin Dutton is a professor of psychology at Oxford University. He says there are new dimensions to the debate.
Now the buzzword is epigenetics. Now, epigenetics is basically a kind of a subdiscipline of genetics, which looks at the way that various genes can be switched on by stimuli in your environment. Let's say that you've got a gun that's loaded, okay? Now, the bullet's not going to come out of the end of that gun unless someone pulls the trigger. Now, the pulling the trigger is done, when we talk about psychopaths, for instance, is done by the environment, usually abusive or stressful childhood environment. But if you've got that gene and you have the environmental triggers that do fire that gun, that's when you can start developing the psychopathic personality.
Sometimes psychopaths can come from a good home, like serial killer Ted Bundy, one of the most violent psychopaths ever known. Today, there is no cure for psychopathy, so the search continues. But the experts all agree on one thing. The psychopath is very difficult to treat.
When you go to the doctor or a psychiatrist, you're suffering pain, psychological or physical. What's the psychopath experiencing? None of these things.
A psychopath doesn't recognize his own symptoms, so he sees no need to change. And studies with criminal psychopaths show treatment can actually make them worse. They pick up all the psychiatric jargon, parrot the right phrases, and become even more devious. In one case, Steve Porter tried therapy on a psychopathic inmate. A year into treatment, he discovered the prisoner's diary.
He gave specific examples of lies he had told me and acting jobs where I was kind of nodding my head and buying it. So essentially, in hindsight, I think my therapy was actually making him more violent. You're not going to magically inject empathy into somebody who does not have empathy.
One strategy that might work is to appeal to the psychopath's self-interest, something California psychologist Dr. Robert Shug tries to do.
You want to get them to understand that, the way that they're acting and behaving, thinking and feeling, is actually harming them. It's actually slowing their progress in life. It's actually giving them sort of a lower quality life than they could have.
Marcus, you pull this off. Could work out very nicely for you.
What type of bonus we talking?
According to the latest studies, this approach is showing promise.
Deal.
Some experts say early intervention is the key. They believe children who display antisocial behavior and callous, unemotional traits can be turned around.
If you can get some of these individuals, well, they're still adolescents, so maybe just developing psychopathic individuals, then one can do quite a bit with them. If we get them young, then we can do something. If we go farther down the age scale, down to age 6, 7, and 8, which we couldn't talk about a few years ago. What, psychopathic kids, children? Well, no, these are children that have certain propensities, personality traits that could develop into the adult form of the trait.
Even if we cannot effectively treat psychopaths, Dr. Kevin Dutton believes in some cases that's okay. Dutton is the best-selling author of The Wisdom of Psychopaths. He believes it can be good to be bad and likens psychopathic traits to knobs or sliders in a mixing studio that might be turned up too high.
But if you are intelligent and you are non-aggressive and you have some of these dials turned up a little higher than others, depending on the circumstances, depending on the context, then that can predispose you to actually great success in various professions. Don't get me wrong. When I'm talking about successful psychopaths, I'm not talking about your pure psychopaths, your psychopaths who are right at the extreme level, who have all of those mixing desk dial characteristics turned up to max. What's important is that you have the right combination of traits, ruthlessness, fearlessness, focus, coolness under pressure, dialed up at the right levels within the right context.
While researching his controversial book, Dutton carried out a UK study to find out which occupations attract psychopaths.
When we looked at the top 10, it was very, very interesting indeed. Okay, sure, CEOs were number 1. We had lawyers at number 2. We had media, especially TV and radio, at number 3. We also had surgeons.
The list includes hero populations such as law enforcement, rescue services, the military, and special forces.
There's a very common sense reason for that. If you've got people who are charming, who are charismatic, who are ruthless, who are fearless, who are cool under pressure, focused and mentally tough, the James Bond personality, okay? James Bond is the poster boy for functional psychopathy, okay?
My name is Jordan Belfort. The year I turned 26, I made $49 million, which really pissed me off because it was 3 shy of $1 million a week.
Our infatuation with the psychopath through flattering portrayals in the media, best-selling novels, TV dramas, and, of course, Hollywood movies, may be shaping society toward a less moral world.
Was all this legal? Absolutely not.
The media also has a way of, in some respects, celebrating the psychopath, right? So there are some traits associated with psychopathy that people just think are kind of neat.
You turn on television at night, and all the programs are about murder and mayhem. People watch Dexter, about a serial killer, I guess, with a conscience. Does that make any sense?
Over here in the UK, we've got shows like Fear Factor, X Factor, The Apprentice, Weakest Link, where the emphasis is all on cutthroat, every man for himself, loosening of inhibition, instant gratification.
The psychopathic style of life is much admired by a lot of people. And this is essentially unfortunate. That is, look out for number 1, get what you can, make sure you retaliate, get your shots in first, right? And don't worry too much about what your impact is upon other people.
Never before have we had such exclusive...
In a rather unconventional experiment, Dutton literally went inside his own brain to better understand what it might feel like to be a psychopath. Using a technique called transcognitive stimulation, Dutton mimicked how a psychopath's brain is hardwired.
So, for instance, I turned down my anxiety levels a little bit and my inhibition levels. And I have to say, it did feel very different indeed. It felt like you've had maybe a bottle of wine, but without the attendant sluggishness, without the attendant tiredness. You felt very confident. Nothing really mattered too much. You felt like you could do anything. And there was a sense of bravado as well. If I could bottle it, I would. But fortunately, for those around me, it did wear off after half an hour.
And Dutton agrees psychopathic traits are winning out in today's top professions, from politicians to pro athletes.
If you've got a guy in a boxing ring, and he's got his opponent against the ropes, he would be a complete fool not to finish him off as quickly as possible, as clinically and as effectively as possible. You want to do that in business, and all of a sudden people say, hey, is that fair? Maybe that's unethical. But actually, I would say, in sport, it's what you're meant to do to be a great champion. You need that ruthlessness, you need that focus, you need that kind of detachment of emotion from behavior in order to be a great champion.
When we come back, they are here to stay. And as we learn more about psychopaths, can we also learn how to protect ourselves?
Let me ask you this then. If you could cause harm and hurt people and just not go back to prison, would you?
Oh, hell yes. Yes. Yeah. I would be lying.
Oh, hell yes.
Say no.
Welcome back, Aftermath Radio, where we talk about all things psychopathic. I'm very excited about our next guest. We have
Psychology professor Dr. Robert Shug hosts an internet radio program. He hears from victims worldwide and also from psychopaths themselves.
I am a high-functioning sociopath. However, I've been at the bottom of the barrel. Prison time, lots of violence, and lots of manipulation, lots of harm to other people. Now, I try my best not to do those things.
Let me ask you this then. If you could cause harm and hurt people and just not go back to prison, would you?
Oh, hell yes. Yes. Yeah. I would be lying to say no.
So this is really based more on a practical decision to stay out of prison.
In success in life. I have a big picture of things that I want out of life. What I'd like to do to some people is highly illegal.
Well, there you have it. That's not something you hear every day. Words straight from the mouth of the self-proclaimed psychopath. But I think it's very important to pay attention to them.
God.
It's very important to be forearmed with information about what the psychopath can do, because odds are very great that you will run into one in your own life.
And when you do, it's crucial to recognize the red flags. The experts offer a survival guide, what you need to know to protect yourself.
Oh, we're just saying
sounds
random
too good to be
people.
true,
Okay.
It probably is. So if someone seems like they're really coming on strong, they're really glib, superficial, fast talker, seem really interested in you, promise the world with no hesitation, that's probably someone to be careful of.
Yeah, we're saying random people. Okay.
Don't be influenced by props and appearances. The winning smile, the captivating body language, the fast talk. They blind us
this
from their
might be
true
talking about you.
intentions.
They're often the guy that opens the door to talk with you about a great business deal that you just can't pass up, and they actually seem genuine and real.
Don't wear blinders. Enter new relationships with eyes wide open. Anyone who seems too perfect is likely far from it. Ask lots of questions.
Whatever you're feeling, and if you do question things with your partner, then it is best to trust those instincts. Follow your gut feelings and run as far away from this type of person as possible.
Know yourself. Psychopaths know what buttons to push. Be aware of your vulnerabilities and blind spots, and be wary of anyone who zeroes in on them. Set firm ground rules. Psychopaths want control, so establish and maintain strict boundaries. If you find yourself a target, know when to cut your losses and get professional help.
If people know what to look for, if they understand the true essence of this disorder, if they realize how vulnerable they really are, if they don't pay attention to the red flags, if they understand how intense the damage can be if they ignore the red flags, this can all be very helpful, and I think it could go a long way towards stopping, the amount of destruction that these individuals can cause.
When DocZone returns next week, we're looking at the plight of working mothers. A sure way to a sharp pay cut is to become a mom.
Motherhood systematically de-skills huge numbers of women.
It's not just a mommy issue. This is really a human rights issue.
The Mother Load. And here's a snapshot of some documentaries we're getting ready for the new year. Canadians are buying into exotic and outright illegal pets.
It's a multi-billion-dollar industry.
People will tell you implicitly, I trust this animal with my life. And they do.
Wild and dangerous. After that...
Wait, what are we talking about? Get out of here.
Robots are taking on hundreds of human tasks.
Get out of here. We ain't interested in that. We're just interested in the crazy fuckers. As Mayo. Libra Destroyer. Hmm. Okay. I said that right. What if the robots are psychopaths? I doubt it. Asimo? Asimo? Who created a monster? Or a monster? Like Boston Jack says. What was the name of... Oh. I totally disregarded that. I was like, get the fuck off the screen. A damn Libra. So, have y'all heard of any of these people? I'm gonna butcher this girl's name. And I'm not that sorry about it because she's a bitch. Irina Gaidamachuck. She is known as the Granny Killer. Elizabeth Weiss, Dorothea Puente, the Death House landlady, and Arthur Shawcross. I will type it. Ariana, Gaidamachuck, Chuck. Pretty much. I don't know, but Dorothea Puente is a grandma that kills others. I'm gonna type it into chat. So, if you can tell me how to say it better, I'd do her. Jack, you don't know what she looks like. Gaidamachuck. That's what I get. Anyways, we'll be talking about these people. Speaking of Gaidamachuck, boom, here she is. I'm just pretty sure I'd do her. Well, there she is, would you? She's kind of a bitch, statistically. Up. I guess that's a Jackie up. Alright, we're gonna start with her. So. Alright. Gaidamachuck. She's a mother of two. She has been dubbed the Satan in a skirt. Right up your alley, Jack. She posed as a social worker to gain entry into flats of her victims. Houses, whatever. After securing their trust, the 40-year-old killed them by smashing their skulls in with a hammer or an axe. Damn. She is going Lizzie Borden on these bitches. She then robbed her victims, who were between 61 and 89 years old, for small amounts of cash in their purses. Why would you do that to an old person? One, you're very sick. Two, old people don't have money. Got dentures and candy. Smashing faces in with a hammer? Is she a Cannibal Corpse fan? What's her sign? I don't know. This really doesn't tell me on when she was born, but I will find out for you. Hold on. Because I'm kind of curious. Gaidamachuck. Hey, there you are. Okay. She was born Capricorn. Is that what you're guessing, or would you know? Because I just pulled her up. It doesn't say. Just said that she was born in 72. So the only thing that we can get off her is probably her Chinese zodiac. Nobody knows when she's born. So I don't know. Up in the air on that one. But she, in all the murders, police say that she only gathered a total of $1,000 from her victims. Sometimes she killed for as little as $20. Fuck. She confessed to the police, "I did it for the money. I just wanted to be a normal mom, and I had a craving for drink. My husband, Yuri, wouldn't give me money for vodka, so she killed people for it." Megan. What a dumbass. No, it's not stupid. She's not stupid. She's an evil bitch. Maybe she's a little stupid. I don't know. Well, she's Russian, by the way. I'm not even gonna say that name of the city of Russia. I'm gonna fucking butcher it. Yekaterinburg. It's Russia's fourth biggest city, and heard evidence from psychiatrists that she was sane when she committed the murders. Oh my god, it's even worse. She was fucking sane. She could have killed bartenders, not old people. Right? Old people, like I said, have dentures and candy. Kill the young, not the old. Killing someone for $20? I've seen the John Wick movies. I'm not selling you anything less than gold doubloons. I have not seen John Wick, so I don't know what you're talking about. But I will say that I know about him avenging the death of his dog. So, my god, somebody kills Simba, my cat, my pride and joy. I'm gonna go John Wick. Let's see. So, apparently, at one point, they didn't think that the granny killer was a woman. They thought it was a man, because only men can be so cruel. Hell no. Bitches be wicked. They questioned more than 3,000 people and finally arrested her in 2010. So, she was arrested in 2010. I think this was going on, it said, since, 2000? So I think she had, 10 years to run amok. Or close to that, 2000 to 2002. And the John Wilkes movies, all the assassins use gold coins as currency. Oh. I do need trenches. Trenches? What? You mean dentures, Jack? Yeah, there you go. Okay. her husband, Yuri, divorced her and shit, but he said he's been with her 14 years and never suspected anything. She was a gentle and kind mother and always equal to help. Yeah, help kill people. Yeah, she posed as a social worker to get into people's houses. That is fucked up. I mean, like, I need alcohol, so I'm gonna go into this old person's house and pose like a person, like social services, and whack them. Might have to bash me in the head or two, because they took out my teeth. Did it? In the head or two, because, oh my god. Jack. I just now got it. Ew. So yeah, that's what we know of her. What do we think about it? I mean, she sounds like a fucking bitch. I'm gonna look up further information because honestly, I want to know what happened to this bitch because it didn't say. It does not say. I'm sorry about the squeaky of the keyboard. Irina. Gaidamachuck. Is that how you say it? Is Gaidamachuck how you say it? My eyes are watering. Okay, so arrest and conviction. Alright, here we go. Let's see. Okay, so she was legally sane. In June 2012. Oh, wait. I gotta do this. Gaidamachuck was charged with 17 counts of murder and 1 count of attempted murder. She was sentenced to 20 years in prison. Relatives of the victims were outraged at the short length of the sentence, citing that Gaidamachuck received just over a year before for a killing, and she should never be freed. Take that, Gaidamachuck. Judge Killer, y'all getty. I would sit in jail. Anyway, so that's that bitch. Get off the screen. Get out of here. So, what? I know, so, we just met a granny killer. What do you think about her, Jack? Damn, that's little. Hold on, guys. Oh, wait, Emma? Ooh, look at that snarl. I hope that's a snarl, because if it's not, I'm gonna feel like shit. Alright. So this lovely young lady is Elizabeth Weiss. Nah, I do have standards. Well, I do her. Shit. Oh my god. Here, Jack. Here, Jack. Hey, Jack. I like your mullet. Boner. Oh shit. I can't do it with a straight face. I can't do it. Okay. You're gonna make me pee. Don't make me pee. Okay, so Elizabeth Weiss. God. She's a German killer from Hamburg. Convicted. Oh shit, she's a child killer. She's a child killer, so be warned. Convicted and executed all she did for killing 5 children. So, as a midwife, and when she was younger, she worked as a midwife. She already had a daughter. She married a guy named Henrik. After being convicted of carrying out illegal abortions, oh fuck. She was prevented from carrying out her profession, and money grew scarce. Tensions grew between herself and her husband. She tried to murder him on several occasions, first by poisoning his food, and then attempting to kill his throat with a razor while he slept. She was not successful and sent to prison after being convicted of several crimes. Oh my god. Yeah, Jack, that's the kind of woman you want. Upon the release from prison, doesn't say how long she was in, but okay. Upon her release from prison, she was offered her service as a child caregiver to a woman who could not raise her children themselves, who had illegitimate children. Initially, she charged the mothers a one-time fee for handing the children over to adoptive parents, who in turn had to be paid. However, she did not always pay the adoptive parents, who returned the children to her, so they had to be gotten rid of. She informed the mothers of the babies left in her care that she had the babies adopted by rich families in distant countries. What she actually did was poison the babies with morphine and burn their bodies in the stove in her apartment. Holy shit. However, suspicions grew about the fate of the babies, and the investigation began. She had to distance herself from dealing in babies. Elizabeth Weiss forced her daughter Paula into prostitution. Paula fled to London and became pregnant. She returned to Hamburg and gave birth in a cellar. Immediately after the birth, Elizabeth Weiss drowned Paula's baby and burnt the body in the stove. Why did you go back home? When the police started investigating the cause, they searched Weiss's apartment and discovered her cache of morphine and poisons. She lived in St. Pauli, in a suburb of Hamburg, and she became known as the Angel Maker of St. Pauli. October 10th, October 10th, 1904, Elizabeth Weiss was convicted in court of fraud, living off immoral earnings, and the murders of 5 children. She was executed by guillotine in 1905. Heck. Pisces? What's her sign? Okay, her sign. I'm gonna have to look. This place that I'm getting my information is not best. But, I mean, that's, you know, the basic. Jacob McCamey. Okay. So she was born July 1st in 1853. So what is that, Cancer? I think that was Jack in a past life. Yeah, Cancer. Wow. Let's see, July, June. Did I say July? July 1st. Yeah, that is Cancer. Emotional motherfucker. And no emotions. Look at her, she wants a mullet. Oh my god. Yeah, give me one of those mullets like Jack. Shave the sides so it accentuates my mouth. Y'all are gonna end up making me piss my pants. Rock to your baby! Your baby! So. Make sure you change the title before you do. Killers pissing in her pants.
In this world, evil lurks. It quietly waits in the shadows, silently stalking until it decides to strike. Evil hides among the crowd, pretending to be your friends, your colleagues, your neighbors. When evil strikes, it does so brutally and without warning. Prepare yourself for the dark world of the macabre while we investigate the notorious evil.
Oh yeah, intro. Pissed pants pissed live stream. ASMR, no. How to get them freaks in here? What's happening? My brain. Who is that sexy dark voice? I don't know. It's me. There's no way I can pull that one off. Ew, her face. Okay, so that was that bitch. She's a Cancer. Literally, in life, too. Get out of here. I think my chat's really big. Still. Or should it just be moved here? Okay, so now our other two people have videos. At least one or two videos. So if you want me to read to you, I'll read to you. No, I won't. I'm gonna give you the lowdown on them. Okay. So anything that you see in the video is not surprising. Grandma! Grandma, why won't you let me grab you? Grandma. There's the grandma. I don't know if I want to do it. Yeah, we'll do grandma. This woman, let's look up. I want to look up one thing. That's her sign. She dead too. January. She's a Capricorn. January 9th. She is a Capricorn. Ugh. You know what I want to say, right? I'd do her for all those that didn't guess. Of course you did. I mean, you would. And Jack, she's dead. Does that matter? Are you still gonna get it in there? Okay. So, anyways. Do I have to dig? Yeah. I got to. Oh my god, full in the mouth. She looks like the woman from Golden Girls. It's the mom! It's the mom! Holy shit, she does. Okay, we gotta do this. So, for any of you that don't remember the Golden Girls or whatever, yeah, gonna.
What is taking so long? It's been hours.
Took me 3.5 days to have Dorothy.
Look at that!
I finally coaxed her out with a pork chop.
You know, Ma, you're really making me feel very bad. You keep telling me how hard it was and how long it took to have me.
Did I mention the colic?
Ma, you're hurting my feelings.
Not as much as you hurt my uni.
Not, ew, P. Arthur. You want naked pictures of B. Arthur? Okay. So, we are going... That's what she looks like. So, we are going to her video. Dorothy. She actually has two... What? She actually has two... little short one.
On November 10th, 1988, Sacramento police grimly removed a number of dead bodies from the backyard of a boarding house. A preliminary examination of the lime-covered and decomposing corpses, all elderly men or women, suggested they had been poisoned. Social workers had long been suspicious that something strange was going on at the boarding house. Meanwhile, Dorothea Puente, who had been running the boarding house, disappeared. Detective Joe Enlow said there had been no reason to hold her.
The woman was free to go. She was not under arrest. We had no right to do that. But you have to understand that.
Sergeant Bob Burns explained that their job was far from done.
We intend to continue to dig throughout the day. We'll be moving the shed out of there. We'll bring in a backhoe. We'll dig up the entire yard.
Which is exactly what they did. Most of Puente's tenants were elderly alcoholics who allowed her to cash their Social Security checks. But they never saw any of the money. Social workers felt guilty for sending them to Puente's boarding house.
I've placed up to 13 people in the home.
She was asked if any had been traced.
At this point, no.
Public health official Marshall Lozanos questioned Puente.
One day I asked her what did she use for the lime for, and she goes, to get rid of the ants that I have problems with in my yard.
Police brought in John McCauley, Puente's tenant, for questioning, but he offered no real evidence. There was still no sign of Puente. The police now knew it had been a big mistake to let her go. They enlisted the support of the FBI to help track her down. Puente was in Los Angeles. Soon she met a man in a bar and suggested he move in with her. Fortunately, Charles Wilgies declined.
I think I'm very lucky that it's ended the way it has. Because I think I would have been a dead man.
In fact, Wilgies had recognized Puente from TV news reports. He informed police.
She did not resist at all, didn't deny. In fact, I asked her, which is your real name, Donna Johansson or Dorothea? And she copped out that Dorothea Puente Montalvo was her real name.
With Puente under arrest in Los Angeles, the police in Sacramento were embarrassed that they had not expanded their search to the sprawling metropolis. LA Police Chief John Kearns was particularly critical of his Sacramento colleagues.
She should have been followed. She should have been tailed very closely. The prime suspect in a homicide case, and there isn't any excuses as far as I'm concerned.
Within hours of being arrested, Puente was taken away on a private plane, which had been chartered by KCRA-TV and a newspaper, the Sacramento Bee.
Almost let her ass go.
She talked freely during the flight.
I have not killed anyone. I told you that. I have not killed anyone. The checks I cashed, yes.
Used to be a very good person at one time.
Right.
Police discovered that Puente had cashed up to 60 Social Security checks belonging to the deceased. Puente was already a convicted criminal. She had served a prison term for theft and fraud and was actually on parole when arrested for the Sacramento murders. The pre-trial hearings began on April 25, 1990. The prosecution painted a damning picture of Puente as a manipulative and heartless killer motivated by greed. After 3 years of lengthy legal wranglings, Puente faced trial. On December 11, 1993, she was sentenced to life without parole.
A short sentence. Shit, did I say that? Back, you messed up movie. It's okay. We got another one. Got another one better. Alright. Ready for Puente 2? Alright, wait. Let's discuss this for a second. So, Jack, since you just got back... life without parole. So, at her age, she got 6 months. Oh my god. I thought I was bad. Holy shit, Cosmo. I thought my statement was harsh. Well, she dead now. Let's see, when did she die? She died 2011. So, she served quite a bit of time. She was apprehended in oh, damn. Damn. She was apprehended in 1988. And she died 2011. She was 82 years old. So, she lived a long time. And she served a long time. So, all jokes aside, but here's the second video we have for her. Since you're back, Jack.
15 little known facts about the world's most evil granny, Dorothea Puente. Number 15. Could her house be haunted? The existence or non-existence of ghosts is something that people simply believe in or they don't. Quite frankly, were someone to put no stock into this idea whatsoever, we probably wouldn't blame them. That said, some people do believe in ghosts with a great passion, and many of them seem to believe Dorothea Puente's actions were the exact sort of activities that lead to an eventual haunting. Future residents even claimed her spirit would visit them at night, leading to an investigation by Ghost Adventures. Detractors of the show would probably castigate the investigation as being just as silly as everything else the so-called paranormal experts investigate. At the same time, true believers will, no doubt, find themselves freaked out at the news that their investigation actually had results, causing the investigators to believe that Dorothea had even more victims than police currently know. One of the ghost hunters, Zach Bagans, even believed these unseen forces momentarily paralyzed him. Fact, fiction, who knows, but it's not like this story needs any more sensationalism, even without its supernatural aspect. Number 14. Juries had trouble convicting someone with her image. By simply looking at her nickname, let alone the pictures of her throughout this article, it should be pretty easy to understand why juries and media found it so hard to imagine Dorothea Puente committing the crimes of which she was accused. She's called the world's most evil granny because she looked like a grandmother, and according to reports, she dug into this image as much as possible, even before her trial began. While actually in her early 60s, Puente told police she was in her 70s, making it even harder to imagine her as being capable of killing multiple people. On top of this, much of Puente's life was spent making her lies as believable as possible, and this meant that to anyone who wasn't a victim, She truly looked like a generously wealthy elderly woman, trying to make life as good and meaningful as possible, for her even more elderly tenants. It wasn't enough to keep her out of prison, but she did escape the death penalty, possibly because, as one jury member is reported to have said, executing Puente would be like executing my, or your grandma. Number 13. She's been the focus of multiple movies and TV shows. Fans of classic literature might read the story of Dorothea Puente, and be reminded of the dark comedy Arsenic and Old Lace. Written as a play in 1941, and adapted into a film starring Cary Grant 2 years later, Arsenic is about two elderly women, who suddenly take up the habit of murdering people, with the title drug. Of course, none of the humor seen in that play was present in Puente's many crimes, as can often happen without Cary Grant's charm, keeping things at a madcap pace. The murder side often being as famous as the crime itself, Puente's house has also gained notoriety in recent years, through the documentary The House is Innocent. There are also live tours through the old apartments, where the murders actually took place, which might just feel a little bit too sensationalist for some people. Number 12. She immediately fled from police when suspicions arose. Not every police officer is entirely prepared for a serious investigation, let alone one of a serial killer. Officer Richard Ewing definitely wasn't expecting a routine missing persons report to turn into a potential murder case, and that's why he called in Detective Sergeant John Cabrera for help. In turn, Cabrera asked Detective Terry Brown and parole agent James Wilson to come along for the journey. When they started digging Dorothea Puente's backyard, defying all logic, and despite all of these dedicated law enforcement officers being on board, not a single one of them made any effort at stopping Puente when she asked if she could go to a coffee shop around the corner to calm down, while the digging continued. In fact, Cabrera escorted her off the scene, apparently never believing an elderly-looking woman like her could have possibly committed those crimes. Once more bodies were found, the officers almost instantly noticed their mistake, but when they went to find this coffee shop, nothing was found. Number 11. She was married 4 times. In addition to the husband she met while working as a prostitute, Dorothea Puente somehow enticed 3 other men to tie the knot at various points in her life. Backtracking a bit, that first husband was named Fred McFall, and to recap, he left Dorothea when it became clear her prostitution and lying would never end. Despite bringing it upon herself, Dorothea was shattered by the divorce, inventing lies about McFall dying, rather than dare admit she was abandoned. Less than 4 years later, she married again to a Swedish man named Axel Johansson, whom she would remain with for 14 highly volatile years. Of course, those years would be a bit turbulent, as they coincided with Dorothea's years as a madam. Eventually, Johansson, too, had enough, and this time, Dorothea wasted absolutely no time in running to Mexico, and getting remarried to a man 19 years younger than she. Said husband was Roberto Puente, explaining the surname Dorothea used in later years. However, there was still a 4th husband not 10 years later, when Dorothea again got hitched, this time to Pedro Montalvo. The wisest of all her husbands, Montalvo left her within months. Number 10. She was a former prostitute WHO owned brothels. Without parents, family, or any sort of support system, Dorothea didn't have that many options in life. This is most likely the reason her life of crime began while she was so young, when she was only 16 years old and became a prostitute. She met her first husband working at a cat house, but almost immediately lost interest in him, and continued her life in the red light district. Unsurprisingly, this eventually led to him leaving her, which may have triggered her crimes intensifying. During this time, she also became an alcoholic, and her lies expanded from revisionist history about her childhood to extravagant tall tales about meeting movie stars and being in Asia during World War II, claiming to survive both the bombing of Hiroshima and the Bataan Death March. Before long, the sex work escalated, from being a mere hooker to owning her own brothel, though she kept on prostituting herself along with her clients as well. One has to imagine that if Puente acted like she did while a prostitute, when she committed her more serious crimes, the whole granny nickname would feel way less appropriate. Number 9. 8 bodies were found in her backyard. In the end, Dorothea Puente's downfall was the same practice she used to find her victims. Because she focused on the elderly and enfeebled, Dorothea needed her victims to come to her less. She raised suspicion, and that meant advertising herself to social workers as the best possible landlord for disturbed or older clients. What she failed to realize is that some social workers care deeply about their clients, like Judy Moise did about Alvaro Bert Montoya. Once Montoya disappeared, Moise became deeply concerned, launching a private investigation that very quickly made her call the police. After just one visit, where they spoke to a single other tenant, officers realized something seriously fishy was going on, and with Dorothea's permission, they began digging her backyard. Dorothea stood and watched as the first body was found, reacting with possibly genuine horror, by letting out an audible gasp and covering her mouth. Sure, she had to know what the police were going to find, but the terror of being caught may well have been genuine. By the time police dug up 7 more victims, she was already gone.
I'm almost positive
Number
that
8.
it's a Texas speech
She
voice.
was spotted right away trying to commit another crime. Now on the lam, Dorothea instantly did the one thing she knew how to do at that point, which was tricking the elderly into giving her money. Somehow making it all the way from Sacramento to Los Angeles, with little money or supplies, Puente walked into a bar, sat next to an elderly patron named Charles Wilkes, and began telling her infamous lies. Calling herself Donna Johansson, she claimed her husband had just died, causing her to fall on some hard times. Within minutes, Puente was telling him about how he could increase the benefits on his pension checks, and soon, she suggested they have Thanksgiving dinner together. The flaw in her plan was that Wilkes had seen a news report earlier in that day, which gave rise to his suspicions, and after a call to the television station, he was almost certain Donna Johansson was Dorothea Puente. The police were informed and sent to the hotel room, where she told Wilkes to reach her at, and where they arrested Puente without incident.
Dorothea, you got away
Number
with
7. She released a cookbook from jail. No matter how severe or vicious the atrocities serial killers commit in their lifetime, it seems like just about all of them wind up with a fan club. For some killers, this means misguided young women writing to them in jail and declaring their love. For others like Charles Manson, it means he was somehow able to record albums from behind bars. Given Dorothea Puente's image, this meant the controversial artist, Shane Bugbee, would collaborate with her on a cookbook. Removed from her violent crimes, it actually makes perfect sense to use Puente's image on a cookbook, as she has the perfect visage of a kind old lady, who probably knows a secret recipe or two that her tenants all would agree was to die for. However, because she was, in fact, a repeat murderer with victims numbering potentially in the double digits, it might be fair to say cooking with a serial killer leaves a pretty sour taste in one's mouth.
I got
Number
something
6.
to say about that after this
Both
video.
her parents died when she was young, not coming to infamy until her 4th marriage
You could have
and
been
subsequent
Batman.
name change. Dorothea Puente was born Dorothea Gray in 1929. Her father Jesse served in World War I, where he was badly injured, leaving him frail and weak for the brief remainder of his life. Her mother Trudy was rumored to be a prostitute, and if not that, she definitely cheated on Jesse, and the two couldn't get along, even before that started happening. These issues would keep escalating, until they finally reached a breaking point, when Jesse died in 1937, while Trudy was in and out of jail. Dorothea and her 6 siblings were sent to an orphanage, when Trudy was deemed an unfit parent. Less than 2 years later, Trudy died in a motorcycle accident, leaving the children orphans and Dorothea, in particular, deeply scarred by the experience. Lonely, gradually separated from her siblings, and without any close friends, Dorothea soon started lying about her past and upbringing, a practice that would heighten considerably as her own troubled adulthood began. Number 5. An earlier victim was found during the discovery process. Once the police and then mainstream media became aware of Puente's crime, both organizations desperately began seeking any information they could find about this mysterious old woman. More specifically, they wanted to know if there were any more bodies buried or discarded somewhere other than her backyard. Though it wasn't proven or included in the crimes she was later convicted of, there was plenty of evidence pointing to her having also murdered her former friend and business partner, Ruth Monroe. Puente and Monroe ran a small catering business together in the early 80s, until Monroe suddenly committed suicide, or at least that was Puente's story. The two were living together at that time, and Monroe's son always believed something suspicious had gone down, since his mother had never appeared suicidal, in the slightest. Once the other bodies were discovered, police reopened the investigation and discovered Monroe's body floating in a box in the Sacramento River, a dubious method of suicide, to say the least. Putting 2 and 2 together, Puente's body count retroactively rose. Number 4. She abandoned multiple children. Truth be told, it's a little hard tracking down exactly how many children Dorothea Puente had in her life. With 4 husbands and countless clients, in her days as a prostitute, the number of times she could have theoretically been impregnated is quite high. Sure, one might argue that it's hard for a woman to hide giving birth, at least more so than it would be for a man to ignore having a child. However, given Puente's penchant for lying, it's entirely within the realm of possibility that she could have gotten pregnant, hidden for a couple months, and gotten rid of the child by whatever means necessary. Think that sounds a little speculative? Well, then you must not know Puente pretty much did exactly that at least 3 times, twice with her first husband, and then again with a random stranger shortly after her first stint in jail. Each time, she gave her children away as quickly as possible, her first daughter sent to her husband's relatives, and the next 2 put up for adoption. Number 3.
Might not have been a bad thing.
She was arrested dozens of
Since
times
she was a
before
serial
the killing
killer.
started.
And a whore.
Given the antics this article has already covered, it should be no surprise, Dorothea Puente spent much of her life in and out of jail even before the killings began. Most prostitutes who get started as teenagers will eventually wind up behind bars once or twice, and that was the case with Dorothea like any other. However, the first time she was sent to jail was actually unrelated to her sex work, and instead would predict the mo she would later develop as a serial killer. Driven by money and a desire for social status, Dorothea's initial conviction was related to forging checks. Her sentence, 6 months in jail. Combining her love of prostitution and making money, she graduated to owning a brothel, as previously mentioned, though we left out the fact it led to another arrest in 1960. Almost immediately after her release, a 3rd arrest for vagrancy came next, and several more fraud charges came afterward. Amazingly, judges were always very lenient on her, offering short sentences or probation, and demanding she stop handling government checks. Number 2. Her targets were the weak and elderly. Having developed an appetite for crime throughout her long life, Dorothea waited until the early 1980s before she started taking lives. At that point, she was in her early 60s herself, so it probably wasn't possible for her to take lives through brute strength, regardless of who the victims were. Either way, the kill wasn't the thrill for her, as Puente was always merely after the money. Knowing she could bilk Social Security checks out of elderly victims for years by pretending they were still alive, Puente first opened a boarding house, where she earned their trust and control of their mail. For reasons that remain unclear to this day, neither the parole board nor the social workers, who sent clients to Puente's boarding house, raised any questions about whether or not her past crimes should have precluded her from this sort of work. As for her tenants, anyone who started asking questions, or realized Puente was keeping their government benefits for herself, would soon wind up dead. Family members may have been sad or surprised that their elderly relatives disappeared, but to police, that wasn't unusual behavior for the elderly, well, at least until their bodies showed up, that is. Number 1. She maintained innocence until her death. Despite a jury of Dorothea Puente's peers convicting her of 3 murders,
like
and 11 of said jury members believing she was guilty of at least 6 more, plus the fact she spent the rest of her life in jail for those crimes, Puente herself never admitted to killing a single living person. As her trial progressed, it became impossible for her to deny knowledge of the bodies in her backyard, especially when former helpers confessed to digging the holes for her, though she never would explain why she wanted them to do that. Instead of admitting who she was once and for all, Puente tried to argue that all 7 of the bodies found in her backyard, plus the others that were connected to her, had all mysteriously died of natural causes. She even confessed to burying her victims' bodies in order to continue robbing them of their social security benefits, far beyond their deaths, but treated all of her other questionable behavior like a total coincidence that didn't prove anything.
Yeah, they
No
still
one
live here.
believed
They
her,
live in the
though,
garden,
and
but they're
Puente
still
remained
here.
in jail from her initial capture in 1988 all the way to her death in 2011.
Okay, so that is the 15 facts about Dorothea Puente. Fuck. Alright. So, I still... okay, wait. Since your questions are still there, get out of here. Cosmo. I still think it's crazy that Zach Bagans' crew are the only ghost hunter show that other ghost hunter shows talk shit about. It's as far as I've seen. Well, Zach Bagans and his crew are... honestly, Ghost Hunters is more believable than Ghost Adventures. Ghost Adventures is what Zach Bagans is a part of. For example, there's a sanatorium here in the state called, Waverly Hills. And it's supposedly haunted. They do tours, they do haunted houses there, and stuff like that, right? So one Halloween special, Ghost Hunters went down there, and as you know, they're a ghost hunting team, and they filmed it and stuff. They came out with no evidence at all, and they were disappointed. It was a live show, and Ghost Adventures went in there and came out with a shit ton. Like, you know what I mean? They, like, find stuff almost on every episode. Ghost Adventures, there's, like, a few episodes that they find evidence. So they are way more believable. They have a lot more credibility. Dude, if she's your grandma, if she's like your grandma needs to be executed as well. Yeah. If she's killing people and burying them in the backyard, yeah. For anybody new that's coming in, this is who we're talking about. If I'm the first husband, I'm putting a bunch of warnings on the front door like the hobo code. I don't understand that. What do you mean by the hobo code? So after the Who thing, I'm thinking this is a voice synthesizer or something. That's why he explains why he sounds so stifled. Like I said, I think I'm like 90% sure that it is actually a text-to-speech type thing. So that's probably why they're just typing in the guy's talking like Bonzi Buddy. Okay, so we're gonna move on to our final serial killer, Arthur Shawcross. You know, the thing about him is that, you know, maybe people have heard of him, but he's definitely not the first person you think of when you think of serial killer. I just recently heard of him, and I'm, you know, I wouldn't say Cosmo Bubba would say I'm a fanatic, but I just like looking this shit up and researching it and shit, and I haven't heard of him. That doesn't mean he's not popular, but most serial killers you hear, Ted Bundy, Eileen Wuornos, Jeffrey Dahmer, you know, those are the top tier guys. More in infamy than anybody. This guy, I just learned about him because there's a Netflix series on him that interview with a serial killer, and he's the guy that they're interviewing. And I was like, oh, who is this? What is this? So, I just found out about him a couple months ago. So hopefully more people will know about him after this, and he would probably make the top 30. You are a fanatic. Okay, so way back in the 30s, hobos would put sign in places where other hobos would see them to tell them what were good and bad places to visit. That sounds weird. Hey, Hobo Bob, this is a good place to sleep. Why wouldn't you just tell somebody, you know, hey, sleeping here for the night? So, anyways, let's look at Arthur Shawcross. Now, this video might get explicit, so I'm warning you now. This is kind of a long, lengthy video.
Sullivan Correctional Facility, just outside Fallsburg, New York State. It's a maximum security prison, home to some of America's most violent criminals. One of them is Arthur J. Shawcross. Shawcross has murdered 11 women and is serving a 250-year prison sentence. His case has raised serious questions about what causes extreme violence and what we understand about the nature of evil itself. We've come to meet him face to face to see if he would tell us what made him such a violent killer.
People on the outside do not know what evil is.
Do you know what evil is?
Sure.
Are you evil?
Somewhat.
Rochester, New York State, 30 miles from the Canadian border. It's a provincial city of 1 million people, sat amongst the gorges and falls of the Genesee River. It's a middle-class town, but it also has a dark side. Lyle Avenue is a mile-long drag through one of the city's run-down neighborhoods, home to its seedy red light district. In March 1988, women began disappearing from the strip. Dorothy Blackburn was a 27-year-old prostitute and mother of 3. Her body was found in a nearby riverbed. She'd been strangled to death. In July, Anne-Marie Stephan, a 27-year-old cocaine addict, also went missing. Her decomposed body was found on the banks of the Genesee River. Anne-Marie Stephan, do you remember meeting her?
I met Anne-Marie Steffens, I think, in front of the Finger Hut on Lake Avenue.
Do you remember killing her?
Yeah, possibly. We're not going into details here.
No, but how did you kill her?
Probably strangulation.
How do you know when they're dead?
How?
It might be.
I don't know, just do.
Give me
More or less after they just relax.
a Twinkie.
The body relax, doesn't fight no more. It only takes about 4 minutes, probably. Sometimes less than that.
To the outside world, Shawcross was just a regular guy. He lived here in this apartment on Alexander Street with his fourth wife, Rose. He worked nights at the local cheese factory and spent much of his free time fishing the banks of the Genesee River. But he was living a double life. He had a mistress, Clara, and was a regular visitor to Lyle Avenue. You've got a wife, you've got a mistress, and you were also seeing prostitutes quite regularly.
And other people. Well, I guess I could say I was enjoying myself.
For almost 1 year, Shawcross killed no one. Then, in July 1989, police found the body of an elderly homeless woman, Dorothea Keeler.
Dorothy was found down on Seth Green Island on the Genesee River, and she was bones. So we really didn't know at the time why he killed her.
She used to live in my house, or my apartment, for a while.
Was she a friend?
She was, until she started stealing stuff out of the house. I asked her, why are you stealing? And she said, she needed money. And I said, you have a bank account. I was paying her $4.25 an hour just to clean the apartment.
So she was thieving from you?
She was taking from me and my wife, Rose.
Does that warrant killing her?
Huh?
Does that warrant killing her?
Well, to me it did.
But Shawcross didn't just kill Dorothea Keeler. He would later return to her dead corpse.
And he came back and visited. He came back and visited, and he took her skull, her head, and threw it in the Genesee River.
After you killed her, you went back later to see the body. Is that right?
No, I went back to clean it up.
She was found with her head removed. Did you?
That's right.
How did that happen?
Easy. Just pick it up and move it.
What, you just pull the head off?
Yeah, it was already off.
Shawcross had now murdered 3 women, but his blaze of terror had only just begun. In Rochester, New York State, the bodies of murdered women had begun appearing around the banks of the Genesee River. And throughout the autumn of 1989, the killings continued. On the 27th of October, Patricia Ives was found strangled to death behind the town's YMCA. And just 4 weeks later, the killings were to take an even more sinister turn.
You know, the one that I remember the most, and that's stuck with me all these years, is a young woman by the name of June Stott. And June was not a prostitute, but she was a little slow. She had acted much younger than her age. I think the thing that was most disturbing about it is that when her body was turned over, she was on her stomach. And they turned her over, he had come back and eviscerated her, cut her open right from the neck, right down to the vagina.
That was a fit of anger. You know, we spent a day down Turning Point Park, you know, feeding the ducks and walking around, and we were making out. And then she just flipped, you know, jumped up, says, "I'm going to scream, I'm going to tell the cops." I snapped her neck. Stayed there all day until dark. Then split her open from her neck to her groin. I didn't go all the way deep into the stomach area, just split her open. I don't know why.
Yeah, it was really disturbing because at that time, we didn't know who we were looking for. Now you got a guy who's, certainly we believe is the same guy, but his activity's increasing. What he's doing at the scenes is becoming more severe all the time.
The killing of June Stott was a turning point for the police. A pattern was now emerging. All of the murdered women were from vulnerable backgrounds. Most of them had been slowly strangled. Their bodies were being dumped around the Genesee River, and the killer appeared to be revisiting and mutilating them. The Rochester police now suspected they had a serial killer on their hands, and they called in the FBI.
The situation on the ground when I first arrived was a lot of stress, massive police involvement in this thing. There's no doubt in their mind they had a serial killer working up there. And so it's like walking into a pressure cooker, you know, in a way. It's just intense.
Police were chasing down hundreds of leads, and yet somehow the killer still seemed able to blend into the background.
One of the big questions was, well, how's he getting these women? These prostitutes are scared to death, and they're being killed. Yet, he seems to have no trouble getting them. The answer is, he's a regular client. They know him. They go with him, they have successful sex, he drives them back, drops them off, no problem. So they're not afraid to go with him. It's just some nights it goes terribly wrong.
We're trying to think, how can these prostitutes make these mistakes knowing that there is a perpetrator on the street that's snatching them right under police surveillance?
I think the prostitutes, and maybe to a degree, some of the investigators are looking for like a real weird guy or somebody really out of sync with what was going on, when in fact it was just the opposite. You wanted to look for somebody who really was very much attuned to that scene and very comfortable in that environment.
But despite a massive police clampdown, the killing continued. Undercover police officers now poured into Lyle Avenue, posing as pimps and punters. But Shawcross wasn't fazed by their presence. He continued to hang out on the street.
I'm sitting on a stoop, and I got shiny shoes on, like a cop shoes, nice dress. And this guy sits down beside me, and he starts talking about the case, pointing out all the decoys. I'm laughing at him.
Why were you laughing at him?
Well, I thought it was hilarious. You know, he didn't know who I was, but he had to open his mouth. He thought he was talking to somebody on the team.
And he was actually talking to the killer?
Yeah.
We subsequently found out that he did hang out at a Dunkin' Donuts. And the police would be in there themselves talking about the homicide investigation and what they were doing, not giving up intimate details, but how they were focused on looking at every vehicle that went down the road and maybe writing down plate numbers and running data. He was listening to that information and even told them that, you know, that he had told his girlfriend to be careful out there because there was a bad guy out there that was picking up women and killing them.
All this time, Shawcross kept up his normal routine, working at the cheese factory, going home to loyal wife Rose. But the girls kept going missing. On the 17th of December 1989, June Cicero, one of the street's most notorious hookers, disappeared from Lyle Avenue.
You're a serial killer killing women.
Of the streets. She was the meanest
and you're
prostitute
able to have
in the city of Rochester.
A relationship with a woman? But yet you're killing all these
Shawcross had picked her up in the
women?
Chevrolet Celebrity that he'd borrowed from his mistress, Clara.
How did June Cicero die? How did you kill her?
Strangled her. Mostly my left hand.
Well, so you strangled them with just one hand?
Right there. Pressure point.
Shawcross drove the dead body of June Cicero out of town towards nearby Northampton Park.
It was snowing real bad one night, and I went out Route 19, I think it was, and I crossed over on 31, headed back toward the city, and there was no cars coming, and I just opened the door and pushed her out. She went over the bridge, over to knock some snow down, and went down in the water. And he just closed the door and kept going.
The police were now to get a crucial break. While searching Northampton Park for the body of yet another missing woman, McCaffrey made a dramatic sighting.
We were less than 2 minutes into the flight from Northampton Park back to Rochester when we flew over Salmon Creek. And underneath the bridge, I could see a body frozen in the ice.
It was the body of June Cicero. And then McCaffrey spotted a suspicious-looking car on the bridge itself.
The passenger door was open, and it appeared that he had been urinating out of the car. And that's what we could see. And as the helicopter flew by, he closed the passenger door and slid across into the driver's seat and started to proceed easterly on Route 31.
It was what the police had been waiting for. FBI profilers had highlighted the killer's pattern of returning to the dead bodies, and McCaffrey decided to follow the Chevrolet.
This guy is very fucked up.
As I was driving to Spencerport, the helicopter was flying above me.
I'm eating my mic while I was eating those, and
it didn't dawn on me what was going on.
I like that for you Libras out there.
But the body of June Cicero was found very close to where you were on the bridge.
Yeah, that was just down the road away. You know, I didn't register what was going on. I had forgot she was there.
It is my belief that Shawcross returned to the bridge to make sure that the body was far enough under the bridge so we couldn't observe it.
As the body of June Cicero was recovered from under the ice, the driver of the suspicious car was taken into questioning by the police. 21 months into their investigation, police had now finally pulled in Arthur Shawcross. And when they ran his name through their system, they found an astonishing personal history.
So he was a good-looking man back then.
Stretching back
so that made him even
years.
more dangerous.
Shawcross had grown up around Watertown, 100 miles east of Rochester.
If he looked like he did when he was interviewing.
In May 1972, an 8-year-old girl, Karen Hill, was reported missing.
Oh.
Fearing she'd drowned, the police began searching the banks of the Black River.
No.
And we went over the bank, and I went on one side, Officer Passer went on the other side, and he says, "Here she is." I walked over under the bridge, and we saw this little body buried with the stones on her, and her little feet sticking up. We knew she was dead because the whole upper torso was buried in rocks, and she was dead. You know, she was cold.
And those guys are tough policemen, you have to understand. And they were walking up from the embankment and just shaking their heads. I heard one of them say, he stuffed her mouth with dirt and mud to keep her quiet. And
A sniffer dog led the detectives from the body of Karen Hill to Clover Street and the home of Arthur Shawcross. Shawcross was then 27 years old and was living with his third wife, Penny. He'd had a troubled childhood and a history of petty criminality. He was arrested and brought in for questioning.
Well, he was a lot different then. He was thin. He was just out of the Army. He was in good shape. He looked like he had very strong arms, very strong hands. And when he was agitated, really agitated, he was scary. You wouldn't want to be in the room with him alone. He looked a little strange, to be honest with you. And I did not get in the cell with him like I ordinarily would. I would always stay outside the cell, so we had the steel bars between us and talk to him there.
Police now spent 3 days trying to get Shawcross to admit his guilt.
And it appears that he made some sort of a confession. It wasn't a airtight confession. He said something to the effect either I could have done it or I might have done it.
What did you do to young Karen Hill?
I ain't saying. I told you I wouldn't talk about that. I wasn't talking about anything that happened in Watertown.
Why not?
Because I make that... I'm not talking about anybody in Watertown. You can either take it or leave it.
But another child was missing too. 4 months earlier, 10-year-old Jack Blake had also disappeared. Shawcross had often gone fishing with the young boy, and police suspected that he was responsible, but they had no hard evidence. And with only a vague confession linking him to the death of Karen Hill, police decided to offer Shawcross a deal. Tell them what he'd done to Jack Blake and face a lesser charge for the murder of Karen Hill.
So we had a conference in which Mr. Shawcross explained to them what happened and what he did and how he killed the Blake boy. This was part of the plea bargain arrangement, that he would explain that case for them.
Shawcross directed police to the body of the young boy, which they found by train tracks just out of town. He was naked, and it seemed he'd been raped before being strangled to death.
What a fucker.
But as part of his plea bargain, Shawcross wasn't charged with the killing of Jack Blake and faced a reduced charge for the killing of Karen Hill.
Mr. Shawcross pled guilty to the manslaughter. He was given the maximum sentence, 25 years. Oh, the public was outraged. They were furious, and they were very upset about the plea bargain. I'm sure the public wanted a murder conviction.
People wanted justice, and no matter, the law had to be upheld, and nothing could be done more than what was done, but it was terribly frustrating for everybody that not more could have been done.
Shawcross served less than 15 years of his sentence before being released on parole in April 1987. Just 15 months later, he had settled in Rochester, and his trail of murder had begun again.
Why would you let somebody out like
Shawcross been held responsible for murder in the second degree and received what would have been a well-deserved maximum sentence of 25 to life at the time, I know one thing as sure as I'm sitting here: he would not have committed these other homicides.
Oh yeah, because he'd be locked up.
Now, armed with the knowledge of the Watertown killings, the police in Rochester were convinced they had their man, and they began to put the screws on Arthur Shawcross.
There were several of the prostitutes that were still missing, and they played on that, the interviewers. And they said, look, Art, there's girls out there that are missing that we know you killed.
They had a stack of photographs of the victims, like a bunch of playing cards.
He took the stack and, like a deck of cards, dealt out the ones that he was responsible for.
And then they went back and talked to him about each one, and he gave a confession to each and every one.
Why did you confess to it?
Why? I just got tired of it after 14, 16 hours later.
Tired of what?
all the what was coming at me. I just couldn't handle it.
You are charged with a violation of Article 125.
Police now had their confession, and Shawcross was charged with the murder of 11 women.
Darlene Trippy, June Stott, Anna Steffen, Dorothy Blackburn.
As he was sent for trial, there was no doubt that he had committed the murders, but why had he done it? As medical experts began to examine him, serious questions emerged as to whether or not Arthur Shawcross might actually be insane. Arthur Shawcross had now been arrested and was awaiting trial for the murder of 11 women. There was no doubt he had killed them, but his defense team now set about exploring a fundamental question. What made Arthur Shawcross act so violently?
Everybody knows there's something wrong with Arthur Shawcross. He's not a normal person. Everybody, you know that just from the beginning. So what is it? Could there be something neurologically wrong with him?
Eminent neurologist
That man
Jonathan
looks like a
Pincus
skeleton.
has examined the brains of numerous serial killers and believes that damage to
He kinda
certain areas of
creeps
the
me
brain
The
is a
doctor.
major factor in causing extreme violence. The brain scan of Arthur Shawcross fitted this pattern.
If you have a lesion on the MRI, you've got an abnormality in the EEG coming from exactly the same place, and behavior that's rather bizarre that comes from this part of the brain. I think it's likely that the abnormality of the brain has something to do with his behavior. So much that I think that had he not been neurologically abnormal, I think he probably would not have been a serial murderer.
But brain damage alone is rarely decisive. Shawcross was also subjected to an in-depth examination by a senior Yale psychiatrist.
What we discovered and then were able to verify was the fact that he was horribly mistreated sexually as a child. In the course of the interviews, he relived some of that experience, which was out of his conscious awareness.
Dr. Lewis led Shawcross through a series of interviews, some conducted under a form of hypnosis.
What are you doing now? What's happening? What are you doing now? Art, why are you holding your penis? Art, what's happening?
Mom.
What's happening? What is Mommy doing?
Mom's got me.
Mom's got you now? What is she doing?
Playing.
Okay.
That's
and what's
disgusting.
happening?
Started
Ew. 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 Okay. That's where we're ending that one. That is just fucking gross. So that's Arthur Shawcross, everybody. I didn't know that was going to be in there. So, do you have any final comments on our murderers that we have discussed today? Yeah. His mother. The thing about him is he was abused as a child, sexually abused as a child by family members. So that's what he was reliving. That's why he was holding himself and talking about his mother. His mother and his aunt abused him. So yeah, that's a little fucked up. Somewhere next of kin. Well, Jack, at least you do have standards. Yeah. So, that is our broadcast today. I knew that there was going to be some sexual aspect to this, But I didn't know it was going to go that far. Next of kin, cousins are fair play. Oh, God. Okay, if you're going to go with a cousin, Jack, at least go to third or fourth cousin to where you're kind of going in the territory of not so related. I mean, come on. Cousins, period, is kind of creepy, but at least make it to where they're like almost surely not related. Oh, okay. But I think that's all the time that we have for today. Thank you for watching. We'll be live tomorrow. I might start doing it. Might start doing this at 9. We seem to get a fair amount of traffic and people looking at our show more at 9. So we might start doing it. Thank you. So yeah, I'll see y'all later. This will be uploaded on YouTube later on as well. So look for that. It's Killer Cutie 07 as well. So I'll see everybody later. Bye, guys.